I have heard that the shortest distance between people is a story, and we all have one, and we all carry this story um, in our hearts. And sometimes we have an opportunity like this to share this story. And so that's what I'm doing tonight, is to share my story about how I got on this path. We all come to our Zen path for different reasons. Some of us stay and some of us don't. And those of us who have sat at the Great Mountain Zen Center for a while have seen people come, people we thought would never leave, and they did. And we've seen new people come who we wondered if they would stay, and they did. So, it's hard to say about it. It just says you never know. You never know about what calls us here and has us stay or has us leave. My journey with Zen started in 2002, but the real journey probably started much earlier than that. I'm going to go back to November 12th, 1972. I was 23 years old and I was teaching English in high school in the town where I live. And I was probably teaching something from a grammar book about making your life better with grammar or something like that. And we were probably all quite bored, I don't know. On that day, and I was going to say, there are those experiences happen, and maybe it's happened to you, where somebody said something, somebody's done something, you've had this experience that radically changed your life. Sometimes it's not that dramatic, but in this case it was. My life that day was changed forever. Miss Lark, the school counselor, came to my classroom that Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. as I was teaching grammar, and she said, "I'd like you to come to my office with me." So she said, "I have a teacher that will cover your class, and I'd like you to come." And I walked down the hall with her, making small talk as I went, and I thought I was going to her office to maybe talk to a parent. We walked into her office and she closed the door and she said, "Your mother has been killed in a car accident and your father would like you to go and pick up your sister and come home." And as minds do, I had a very strong reaction to that because that couldn't be happening. I did not believe that. I thought, what? I was in such a state of maybe self-defense or denial, or it did not compute. It just did not compute. But I did what she said. And I left thinking, what? How can this be? I just talked to my mother this morning. And so I went to pick up my sister and I went home. And from that moment on, not precipitously, but very gradually, my life went into free fall. It became groundless and I lost all sense of orientation and direction. I was 23 and I had a mother who, I think if mothers do their job and families do their job, they send us into therapy. And I had a mother who had lots and lots of issues. And I did, thanks to her, ended up going to quite a bit of therapy. But from that point on, my anchor was gone. And the backstory of this is that I grew up in an alcoholic family. My dad was the primary alcoholic, and my mom was an episodic drinker. I mention this because drinking was the only coping mechanism I knew to somehow dull the pain or escape from my reality, to change my inner experience. It would be untrue to say that I had not had experience with alcohol before then. I'd had a lot of experience with it because as a teenager, I was drinking very excessively then. So this wasn't the first time, or this wasn't an event that sent me into the use of alcohol. I was familiar with it. But my mom's unexpected death left me without an anchor. It left me shifting in the winds, uncertain and untethered to anything. The one thing that she instilled in me, she instilled a lot of things in me, but was a very strong work ethic and a certain drive to achieve. So shortly after her death, and it's a very odd thing because I took 3 days off school and went back to school and kept teaching like nothing happened. But shortly after her death, her voice was really strong in my head, and I got into a master's degree program, and I finished that within a year or two. And then I got into another one, and I finished that rather quickly. And then with my mother's voice in my head, at 28, I got into a doctoral program. And I did that for her. I did that because I could hear the voice of her saying, it's important that you are self-sufficient, that you can fend for yourself, and that you have an education. Education is the way to do that. So I finished my doctorate when I was 32, and I left graduate school with a feeling of restlessness and wonder about what was I going to do and what was my life going to be like. I had married a very lovely man 6 years before that. And when I finished my doctorate, my marriage was really on the rocks. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to go out and experience whatever was out there. And I knew that where I lived and how I was living was not the experience that I wanted. And so my husband and I divorced, and I will say that I did him a big favor by doing that. He was probably lucky to get rid of me, even though he might not have thought so at the time. I think that was true. And all this time that I was going to school, I was drinking and going to school and studying and drinking and going to school and studying and doing that over and over. And I was functional, but it was a case of maybe looking okay on the outside and feeling miserable on the inside. I had taken a job as a school counselor in Rapid City where I live. And because I was so restless and I couldn't settle down and I felt like I needed a change, I decided to take a job with the Department of Defense dependent schools in Germany, thinking that I could see the world that way, and I did. I saw a lot of the world that way. I saw a lot of the world through an alcoholic haze too. Some of it I don't remember very well. And by the time I went to Germany, my dad had died from alcoholism. I divorced. And of course, my mother had died about 10 years before that. And so I headed off to my next stage in my life. And I hadn't grieved any of that. I hadn't taken the time to really feel what that was like or how I might live into that. And so I just kept going. But I didn't grieve because I didn't know how. I didn't know what to do. I just kept putting one foot in the other, front of the other, and one drink after another. I spent 2 years in Germany near the wine fields of France, and much of the time when I wasn't working, I was drinking. There's this belief in the field of addiction that one has to hit bottom before they can start to change. And I did hit bottom in Germany. I was out driving drunk on a windy road at night, something I wasn't familiar with, and I had a car accident. And that was the beginning. I wrecked my car, and had that been turned over to the authorities, had I been caught, I would have been sent back to the States immediately. I would have lost my job and been sent back. I wasn't. I was able to get my car fixed and get back on my feet, but what I did realize was if I don't change some things, I'm going to kill somebody. I'm going to kill myself. And at that point in my life, I really didn't care if it was me. So one of the things that happened while I was in Germany was that there was a woman in my school who was a kindergarten teacher. And I don't know how this, I kind of do know how this happened through a conversation in the teacher's lounge, but she asked me if I was having trouble with alcohol. And I kind of hemmed and hawed and stammered and shuffled my feet and said, well, maybe a little bit. So she said, well, how would you like to go to an AA meeting? And I said, oh, I've tried those 12-step groups and they just don't work for me. But I went. And that woman became my sponsor. That was 34 years ago. I just had my 34th anniversary of sobriety last Monday. And I started 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, putting together a series of days where I didn't drink. That was the first time in probably 15 years that I hadn't been a daily drinker. And I was not at all sure this was going to work. In fact, I was pretty skeptical about the whole thing. But I started going to those meetings. And I started just getting through 1 day at a time. And I got a chip at the end of a week. And I'm like, wow, this was pretty amazing. 1 week where I hadn't had anything to drink. As I said, I was really skeptical and I really did not think this was going to work. But it became 2 weeks, and it became 3, and it became a month. And I came back home that summer, and I had friends here who I just loved to drink with, but I didn't get together with them. Instead, I went to some AA meetings. And I went back to Germany and I thought, maybe I can turn the corner here. Maybe I can. So, I've put that together and I've been a fairly regular attender at AA, but I haven't for the last year. I haven't gone because of COVID. But the point that I think is important here, sobriety really started my journey of waking up, of coming to experience my true self. They call it recovery. And for me, many years later in lots of AA meetings, I have come to understand that recovery is going back to my own true nature, to the divine self or no self that I came into this planet with. And it is that analogy that you've heard, it's familiar to you, of the mirror that's all fogged up. And this whole practice of meditation is that process of clearing off the mirror so you can really see, so you have some clarity. So I didn't know anything about my true self, of course, when I first went to AA. But I did see some authenticity and some honesty of people who came and spoke from their hearts at AA meetings. I saw that and I thought, a lot of the people that I've been associating with or not don't talk like that. There was a genuineness and a real sincerity, and that touched me in a deep way. And I learned through all those AA meetings about vulnerability and about shame. And I knew I was a good friend of shame. I knew shame really well. And I learned about the strength in being vulnerable and about not hiding. I heard somebody say the other day that the opposite of addiction is connection. And when I was in my addiction, I didn't have connection. And the most, where I lost connection was with myself. The kind of connection I had with other people was sort of superficial. But I started to learn through sitting through those meetings that I could love other people. And I think I learned that I could love myself. In 2002, and this is about my path to Zen, but in 2002, I was getting ready to retire from the school system in a few years and from my school counseling job. And I was a member and a very active member in a Lutheran church. And at an adult discussion after the church service, somebody said, and it could have been the minister, we should pray for those people who have not found Christ. I had a really visceral reaction to that. And I was so triggered by that comment, by what I viewed as the arrogance of that. And I said, you mean that we should pray for the Hindus and the Jews and the Buddhists and everybody else that they should find Christ? Well, yeah. And that was the beginning of my walking away from that. And that this isn't to say that I'm making a judgment about those people. It's to say that I was making a decision about myself. And I did leave. And I felt again just so untethered and like I was in this groundless place of nothing to hang on to. And the other piece of it was that I was really angry. I had a real chip on my shoulder. And the chip on my shoulder came from a lot of things. It was a very mistaken notion I had about I hadn't gotten the credit due that I received, that I hadn't gotten the credit that was due me for a lot of things. And I was feeling unrecognized and like, do you know who I am? It was a lot of arrogance on my part, but I did have a chip on my shoulder, and the political divide was starting to be very evident to me. And I had a chip on my shoulder about that. And I thought, God, I can't go into retirement feeling like this. I can't. And I knew that somebody told me that meditation was a good way to maybe deal with anger. So there was a woman in Rapid City, and some of the people in the Laughing Table song are familiar with this. Francine Campone had a meditation group meeting in her home, and I thought, well, what the hell? Let me see what this does. And I went to that. I talked to her, and she told me about Zen, and it kind of went right over my head. But I thought, I'm miserable enough with this anger. I think I'll give this a try. And so I went to her house every Saturday, and Hakaju was there. And he was really into this stuff. And he said to me, hey, why don't you go down to the Great Mountain Zen Center with me? And I'm going, well, what do they do down there? Well, he said, it's a meditation group. I said, oh, well, okay. And I wouldn't say the rest is history. I wouldn't say that, but that's where I met Yugen and Kendo and Lisa and Chris and Christopher and Shinzen and so many wonderful people, and Mui and Corin, so many wonderful people. And I will tell you, it was one of the most arduous things I ever did because I didn't really care for meditation. I went and I looked at my watch most of the time, feeling like, God, when is this going to be over? And I can't wait to go home. And I had all that chaos going on in my head. And how long, and why are these people walking in those circles? If that isn't ridiculous. And they're sitting facing the wall, my God. And I kept going. And I kept going. And so, you know, some of the things about meditation, I think are subtle and they're profound, as we say before a Dharma talk. It's infinitely profound, infinitely subtle and profound. And some of the changes that I have noticed, and sometimes I don't see them, but I bet that my Sangha, my Dharma brothers and sisters have seen some changes in me. Some of them that I do know is that I don't care. I'm not so interested in comparing myself to other people anymore. I don't do that so much. I've kind of let that one go. Material possessions, I never was big into that, but they're even less important to me now. And sometimes I went to Germany for a geographical cure because that's typical. If people think if they move across the world, then everything is better. Or if you get rid of this husband or wife, things will be better. I realized that's not true. And I'm not so inclined to look for the answers outside myself, that I do look inside. And I've realized, and you've heard me, some of you, rail about the past president. And I realized that the darkness of the world is a direct reflection of the shadow that still exists in me. And that if I'm going to do anything about that, I probably better do something about me. And I'm also noticing that our time is just about over. But I owe this path to Zen through the path of sobriety, of waking up and putting the cork in the jug and settling into my life. And I am so grateful to every one of you who came to listen to this tonight, because you've been an important part of my Zen practice, of my sobriety, of my coming to terms with myself. One last thing I wanted to say, I had this delicious conversation with Corin yesterday, and she was saying that Zen has allowed her to refine her life. I think it's a beautiful way to say it, that it's a constant refinement of our life. And so with that, my friends, I realize I've talked a long time, and I'm very grateful for your presence and your being here. So